Hello and welcome back to the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast. I'm Dr. Colin Campbell. How are you? I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. Today in Black History, as we like to start all the time, and this one we start with episode 18, just two away from 20, we talk about the legacy of Roy Wilkins, the former executive director of the NAACP. Roy Wilkins passed away on this date in 1981. He was the leader of several black led newspapers before he took on his executive role. His legacy leaves behind a lot of reporters who were influenced by his work in spreading news and covering black issues pertinent to that time. Now, he was the editor of the Kansas City Call, and he was the journalist at the Minnesota Daily and the St. Paul Appeal. So he had a great resume, and we just wanted to give a little respect and a little shout out to Roy Wilkins, who paved the way for so many black journalists, and he has a legacy that lives on today. Another person who is very well known for her contributions to communications and journalism and reporting is Oprah Winfrey. I'm sure you have all heard that name before. Well, her show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, or simply known as Oprah, began on this date back in 1986, I believe, like 25 years ago, right? So it was a long running show that lasted 25 seasons. So it started September 8th, 1986, and it ran until 2011. So yeah, it's been over a decade since the Oprah Winfrey Show went off the air. And of course, we know the illustrious career that Oprah Winfrey has had. The start that she had, defying the odds, defying stereotypes, uh, those who casted doubts on her abilities. She shut them all up and put them to shame, obviously. She became a billionaire. And she's still producing shows and is still very instrumental. We saw her at the Democratic National Committee convention. So she's still very influential, even in political circles. Again, we're not trying to be partisan. I'm just using that as a point as to the last time we saw Oprah Winfrey in the public stage and making statements. So again, hats off to Oprah Winfrey, who is still very much admired. In fact, there are a number of people who would have liked to see Oprah Winfrey run for president, but she has not expressed interest in doing that. So again, we want to pay respect and give our admiration for Oprah Winfrey and the contributions she has made to communications. Well, as we roll on with episode 18 of the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast, of course, I have to introduce to you my man behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the camera, but not today, Derek Kenny. So if you hear that voice off screen, that is my man DK in the
Hey,
background. How you
hello
doing, Derek?
there. Pretty good, pretty good. It's another wonderful weekend in the Washington D.C. area. It's
It
starting to
sure
be
is.
that thing where it's kind of warm in the daytime and cool, too cool at night.
Yeah, in fact, I think they said it's going to be the chilliest night tonight that we've had since May. So it's
Oh
about that time.
gosh,
Yep, summer
gotta
is coming to an end, my friend.
call up
So
burritos.
yeah, so one of the things that has been in the zeitgeist when it comes to communications, of course, we talk about communications and communication about communication, is the interview between Dana Bash and, of course, the presidential candidate Kamala Harris and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz from Minnesota. And some people really were displeased with the setup of that interview. And because we talk about some of the fundamentals of journalism and reporting at the CPC, I wanted to call attention to just the framing of the shot. Now, if you look at it, and Derek, of course, chime in here, but look at Kamala Harris. Doesn't she look somewhat diminutive next
Yeah,
to Tim Walz and almost accented with Dana Bash on the other end of the table,
yeah.
looking almost the same size as Tim Walz, but much larger than Kamala Harris? And so a lot of people were critiquing that, making her look somewhat diminutive and making her look almost less than. And I think that's kind of a travesty. And of course, with the upcoming debate, which will be in 2 days, with her and former President Donald Trump, there was a rule that she will not be allowed to stand on a box or anything that would actually elevate her height. So
Oh
I think that
really?
cue from this
Wow.
interview and said, "Hey, it gives her a visual disadvantage." And
Hmm.
now some people are saying the producers who are behind this setup really should be spoken to or castigated for the way
Admonish,
that
yeah.
they set up this shot. What do you think, Derek?
Yeah,
Especially when it comes to lighting people who look like us, right, with a little bit more melanin than
yeah.
our lighter complected compatriots. What should we be paying attention to here?
There's a lot of things I don't like about it. So this is basically a E&G interview a shoot where you go into a location that's not traditionally used for interviews, and you bring in the cameras and the lights and all the things, and you set things up so that you can facilitate a nice natural looking interview off site. But what I don't like about it is some of the finishing touches aren't there. The table doesn't have a tablecloth, so you see the legs of the people underneath. And I'm old school, so something about showing a woman's legs under the table that throw me off. Like you don't necessarily do that, in a shot. But even if it is a man, I'm not even sure if you would do that as well. Also, the way that they're seated from this side profile, it looks like the host Dana Bash is looking more so at the vice presidential candidate as opposed to looking directly at the presidential candidate. And so that takes off the focus for me as well. And then lastly, to your point, two things. The presidential candidate is seated furthest away from the camera. So she looks smaller than she actually is because of her positioning. But then also, in many cases, you would elevate the seat of one of the interviewees so that you have everyone on a par to one another just for the composition of the shot. So don't like it that much. I don't like the glass window in the back that has the words backwards. To me, it's kind of distracting. The whole situation, I think, and again, when you're shooting things with important people that have busy schedules, it's hard to find an ideal place to have an interview. But if you're running for president and you're interviewing presidential candidates, I think you could do better. And I think the lighting was adequate. The shots go from a very wide shot, which is a very wide shot, because you see the entire body of both of the candidates and the interviewer, to extreme close-ups, and that's a little off-putting to me, to watching it. But to each their own, and their cuts too, very stark cuts. But other than that, I think okay, the lighting is okay. It's a little dark, but again, it's an ENG shoot, so it's not an ideal situation. You're not in the studio just pushing faders. You're in the field. You're measuring the light and for each subject, and you're doing the best you can. But at CNN, so the best they can is probably a little bit better than what we're seeing here.
Right, better than we could do in our living rooms or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. Are we,
certainly.
are we able to play a little bit of this
Yeah,
clip?
let's
Just
let's let's
like
play it.
15
Let's see if
seconds or
there's
so.
some.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can. All right, here we go.
To make your case to voters than any candidate in modern American history.
Now, I will say I do like the depth of field.
If you are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism.
Okay.
I think,
So
sadly, in the
I
last
didn't want to
decade,
play too much. I didn't want it to be focused too much on the interview, the CNN interview. But I wanted to pay attention to a couple things. If you look at the way that Dana Bash looks, excellent shot there. The lighting looks good on her. You suggested there, Derek. There's the bokeh effect, which we also call depth of field. But if you look at the presidential candidate shot, she looks again somewhat diminutive, like she is kind of small in that shot. She doesn't look empowered. There's also look at the clean background, the cleaner looking background that Dana Bash has. She
Yeah,
almost looks like she's sitting up more, or that she's just more. She looks more reverential. And then when you look at Harris's shot, Let's for she looks like she's almost crunched over in a way. She looks a bit darker in this shot. It's also very busy in the background. Like, yeah, you're like, what are those
Yeah.
white looking things? And they're almost the is that the seat, the back of her chair that's coming over her shoulders that just makes the shot look very congested. And
Yeah.
in a
So
way, it looks like this was almost thrown together. And here's another reason. This looks like it was supposed to be a round table discussion, right, DK?
yeah,
But
yeah.
let's go back to the opening shot there.
Even this
Okay.
shot, you look at this shot.
Like,
Look how much smaller she looks than him in
that's
this
what I'm
shot.
saying. She looks
It's
diminutive.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Let's look at the three shot, that the opening shot. Okay. Now, what do you notice when you think of a round table discussion?
Uh, Equality. Like there's no. I, it's kind of
Well,
what
the thing
what
that I don't know,
yeah
maybe I'm paying, maybe I'm
yeah
overthinking this, but it's a quadrangle. The sharp angles
yeah
where you have Walls on one end, and then you've got Danabash on the other end, and then you've got Harris sort of, off center, but it's
yeah
like it's a quadrangle table. Like they couldn't have found a
yeah.
round table or a semicircle table or something to just
I,
make it a bit more smooth. I just didn't like the angles on that. It
it
just
looks
looked a
yeah
little bit jarring
it
to
looks
me.
absent. It's kind of like if you're filming a TV show and you have that missing seat for the audience to be able to see. It's kind of like that, but it's not. I think it's kind of poorly done. I would almost start the shot with over her shoulder, looking at the candidates, as opposed to just the side profile of the vice presidential candidate and the interviewer with a hit on Kamala. But I don't know. There's different ways you could have done it, and this is the way they did it. So it
Yeah,
doesn't seem like they used the
I
shot a
would have
lot.
done it like they've done, I believe, with other
Yeah,
interviews with presidential candidates, and put them in a room where you don't have the table. You just have
yep,
them sitting next to each other, and you just have them almost like someone is sitting in your, maybe in your living room, I guess, or
yeah,
where without the coffee table, or you put the table really low, perhaps. I don't know,
yeah,
but I think having Harris's arms on the desk, she just looks kind of crunched there.
yeah. And
I
she's
think
leaning forward. Yeah, makes it look smaller. Yeah,
they could have moved Walls closer to Harris, or vice versa, Harris closer to Walls, so they don't look as separate as they do. It was just it just did not seem like the most organized shoot. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It just there was a lot there, and I think a lot of us
Mm.
in media could have done a much better job in setting up this shot, knowing the budget that they have probably to do this. Right, like you
Yeah, the
said,
budget's pretty
CNN,
good.
as
There
far
are a
as a
lot of
media company, is
very
probably one of the top media companies to do
yeah,
this. So you know
very
they had a budget to set
now.
this up quite nicely.
Now I
Why
did
did they
want to.
do it like this? I have no idea.
I want to take one step back though because I think we're going into a new era of America, and historically presidents have all been tall white male, right? And now we're in this new era
Have they
where
though? Like
have
what
they all
Bush
been? Was
W
Bush?
was only,
Was
well, I
he?
guess he was above average, I
He's what
suppose.
5'10", 5'11", or
Maybe,
so.
yeah.
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 So now we have an era where we have very qualified female candidates across the board for different positions and areas, and they're more than likely females. Women will might be shorter. So this is a whole new thing where you're looking at the what does the president look like, and I want to are we question maybe we should question ourselves as to is it okay for her to be shorter and look smaller because she is smaller. Um, you
Yeah, I
know,
think there's a middle ground there, DK. Like, for
yeah,
example, I know when I've done interviews for different networks, they've had me sit on cushions before. Why?
yeah,
Because the framing looks better, the lighting
yeah,
hits me better, the composition of the shot just looks
yeah.
better. And I think it's okay. That's what television is for. I mean,
Hmm.
they wear makeup. Walls has a little bit of anti-shine on his head. Doesn't make the what he's doing any less credible.
Yeah,
Or Harris is wearing makeup. I mean, doesn't make what she's
certainly.
saying any less
Yeah,
credible. So for her to sit on a cushion, and I'm not saying that she should be the same height as Walls either. I'm not
yeah,
saying make
yeah.
her into a
Hmm.
6'2". I don't know how tall Walls is. You don't have to make her the same height, but at the
Right.
same time, for the sake of composition and making the shot look better,
Yeah.
They didn't need to make her or leave her to look so diminutive
Right.
in between Bash and Walls. You know what I mean? Especially being that she's the presidential candidate, not the
Right.
vice presidential candidate,
Yeah.
not the interviewer, but the
Yeah.
person running for the executive office of the land, right? So they
Right.
could have probably set it up just a little bit more robustly, I think.
Yeah. Now I do like that she's centered in the frame where she's the central focus, and even you look at the posture of the vice president to kind of be like, I'm the second, like she's. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about her posture or whatever because she's a politician and we're not doing politics. But yeah, they could have set her up, or they could have positioned it better to present her in a more balanced way, or just to make the composition better, just to seem like they're where they were, as opposed to they were being interviewed by CNN. It's like they're in a dimly lit campaign headquarters in some place, Idaho or Iowa. I'm not sure where they are. I don't know. I didn't, but I will say I don't like the setup. The table was not great. The chairs were kind of just very basic. You're starting off with side profiles of people, and then one person's looking starkly at the camera. It wasn't my favorite. It wasn't my favorite. So
Yeah.
yeah. But again,
So
they're
we
coming
both
into it.
agree there that they could have done a better job
Could
with
have done a
setting
better
this.
job. I would say the staff was pretty good, and these guys are coming into an area that's not built for TV and customizing it so that it works well for TV. So, in their defense, not saying that we're accusing them of anything terrible because, it's an interview, right? So, but, you get there, you look at the environment, and you may or may not have a day to do a walkthrough. And then once you get there, someone else tells you, go left instead of right. Someone, I don't know. But
Yeah,
they could
that's
have done
possible.
better.
Like
Yeah,
logistically, maybe that was the one of the few spaces that they
yeah,
could get at a specific time. I guess I find that hard to believe,
yeah.
but
And
we
and
don't know
usually you would
exactly.
have in the background of a presidential candidate or something, there would be like a flag or something, like something in the background
Yeah,
that
that's another.
that establishes them as the vice president of the United States, or something presidential would be in the
That's a
and see the,
very
and
good point.
and that
That's a
might
very
not
good
be
point
on CNN. That might be on Kamala's team,
on the
because her
campaign,
team, someone should be
right?
making sure that she's presented a certain way, no
Well,
matter where she
yeah,
is.
a lot of it is on the Harris campaign
Yeah,
because right, they are in charge of her image, right? They
yeah,
have to protect her image, and I do think that that's a very good point that I didn't even think of. DK is that
yeah,
yes, they probably should have had an American flag in the background
yeah,
because
yeah.
we all know how sensitive we are
Right.
as Americans when it comes to images of patriotism, right?
Yeah, certainly.
She
Yeah.
is running against a candidate who has hugged the American flag to
Hmm.
show uh, empathy and to show reverence for the stars and stripes. So to have one absent, we also have to remember Obama was widely criticized, I believe, at one point for not wearing an American flag pin one
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
don't know if you remember
And
that, but he was
and
widely criticized and condemned, and it was all over the media,
you know,
almost as much as that time he wore a beige suit.
yeah. And if I walked in here and there wasn't a lower third talking about, and I'm sorry, this lower third right here is not a flattering one, but if I walked into this interview and I just saw them sitting there, I think they were talking about something on COVID or something that's like, it's not like, I wouldn't think it's something, some type of interview about with the presidential candidate. It seems like two people that were giving information about breaking news or something, local politics or local affairs, or it doesn't seem like you're interviewing like a presidential candidate interview, and maybe that's a good thing, but it
Yeah,
doesn't have the pomp and circumstance that you'd have interviewing um, someone representing half of the popular vote of the United States of America.
you're
That
right.
you walked in. It's just it's underwhelming. There it is. It's underwhelming. So that's
Underwhelming. There we go.
and I will say though, it's not a journalist's job or a news organization's job to enhance the look or the presentation of anyone while they when you do the interview. I guess other than I guess trying to
No,
help with
no one is
competition in the
calling out
shot.
Dana
Yeah,
Bash for this at
right.
all. No,
Yeah,
that's that. We'll talk
yeah.
about Dana Bash in a second, but
Okay.
no, that's not her fault. But there are. I'm sure they have lighting people. They have production staff
Yeah,
that deals with lighting. Now it's up to the Harris campaign to say, hey,
yeah.
I don't think that she's lit correctly, or you could do a little bit more here. That's true, but
And even
they
as a
should have
tablecloth, this is so.
CNN to just do basic lighting
In
and
Georgia.
basic
You
composition.
And it's just so dark. You know, you ever remember that? Even though
Well,
like
see,
right
but Dana
there,
Bash looks great
it's
though.
deep though. It's deep, but it's still kind of. It's very warm. You know, it's very
It's almost.
warm.
I feel like they were missing a backlight. Look at Harris on her right side, on her
Yeah,
not on her left side, on screen left.
yeah,
In real life, on her real life right side, it looks very dark. It looks
yeah,
like underlit on that side. On our left.
yeah. Well, it's not bad. It's not that bad though. When you go to this shot right here, I'm not too. I don't feel too bad about it when you go to the solo shot.
I don't know.
You
I feel
know,
like it looks underlit to me on my left. But
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
could be
You
worse.
know,
Could be worse, I guess.
but for her though, you really just. And then because we're talking about communications, it's not just about the journalistic part because Capitol Press Club is about also government PR folks, government information officers, but also information officers that serve candidates and others in terms of publicity and managing brands and image. And I think they did a disservice to her. Whoever's on her team, and hopefully I don't know them, but when the presidential candidate shows up, I don't care who she's interviewing. There should be something in the background that says, "I'm the next president." And empty chairs in a restaurant
A campaign slogan for
or the
Pete's sake.
campaign slogan, yeah, that doesn't
Yeah,
look.
there could have been
That
so many
doesn't.
different things. The
Yeah,
confusion that we
yeah,
see in the final product, right?
yeah.
In the final
I would like
product,
it
we
better if
see
there's real people
logos
in the
and we see
background.
columns and we see
Yeah,
who knows what's going on back there. But we do know they could have done a much better job with setting up something pre-stage, like
yeah,
a flag, like a campaign slogan, like who knows, maybe even a
yeah.
blanket. I don't know, to cover
Yeah.
up some of that chaos in the background. I don't know.
And even a tablecloth, and it sounds silly. Well, it may sound silly, but even just a simple thing like putting a tablecloth on a table, could you basically have a naked table? It's just a basic table, but this is a half. She's representing half of America right here, and you have her sitting at a regular basic table with no tablecloth. I don't know what they're looking back at, but maybe there's
Yeah,
something relevant.
yeah, it's probably, wherever they are, I'm sure there's some significance to it. And not to
Yeah,
take away the special aspect of whatever building they're in or whatever
yeah,
room they're in, but it definitely still could have been set up better. You know
yeah.
what
And
I
then there's
mean?
like empty cups. It's almost it almost looks apocalyptic. It's like it's like there should be people. There were people there like 5 minutes ago because there's cups there, but now
And
that
they all
everybody's
ran out.
gone, it's like what happened?
Like it's like
You
the
know?
sequel to Blade
Yeah,
Runner or the
yeah,
Terminator.
yeah. Like yeah, elect her, and nobody will be eating in the cafe anymore. She'll be giving interviews. I'm like, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm gonna leave it. That was okay. Again, we are nonpartisan, but
We
I'm
are
just
not
looking at
partisan. We're just really critiquing
we're looking at
the
the
setup of the
optics.
shot,
Yeah,
which I think we've done. I think
yeah,
we've done.
yeah,
I did want to talk about an article that came out of the Huffington Post that talked about the need for media to understand how to interview Kamala Harris a bit more adeptly. And I think, there might be some merit to it. Again, we have to remember that this was only, it's really the only sit down interview that Harris has had with journalists. So to really make that broad sweeping statement that it's
yeah.
all of media who need to interview her better, I feel like it's a bit premature. But
Right.
anyway, let's tackle it. It's like we do talk about media. One of the critiques is that Dana Bash asked about the former president's comment in the during the NABJ convention. Remember when we had the oh geez, I'm forgetting her name now. Oh, that's not good. Is it? It wasn't Sarah, was it? Who the woman who asked about the president asked about her color, asked the president about her race, and the former president went on to talk about her turning
Mhm.
black. I don't know if you
Right.
remember
I don't
the
remember who the young lady was, but I do recall that we did discuss at length that interview, and that has become a point later on about, I've even heard it echoed, like, who is she? Because they're starting to call, well, I'm not going to, use the terms they're talking about, but, saying that she's a chameleon, a play on Kamala. So that did give birth to something. What do you think, as a media person? Do you use that? Do
I'm
you
conflicted.
address
I was
that?
conflicted about the critique about this, and
Hmm.
I realized it was a stupid question. By the way, that it was Rachel Scott from
There it
ABC,
is.
who asked the question at NABJ about race and ethnicity or something, and the former president went on to say that at one point she was Indian and then turned black, which was
Hmm.
very offensive. But I do think that I feel like as a journalist, it's worth asking, and I know maybe I'll get roasted by some of my colleagues if they watch this and critique it. But I almost feel like, yeah, it was her moment to just say, yeah, it is the same old, same old. Harris's response was fine to me. I'm not critiquing Harris's response at all. She said, Harris responded, "It's the same old, same old. Next question." Great. She didn't have to. She didn't have to prevaricate. She didn't have to stay on the topic. I think that was a fine response. I do think that it was okay for Dana Bash to ask it, though. I mean, it is something that
Yeah.
was kind of a personal attack. It does speak to the issue of race and ethnicity. We try to we pretend, or at least some of us, wink, wink, try to pretend that we're colorblind when we're really not. So to ignore that issue and to ignore that question, especially since it was really one of the big um, topics that came out of that interview, I think would have been a bit remiss. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
get
That's
it.
the.
Journalists are critiqued for that gotcha journalism and the sensationalist journalism, but I do think it speaks to uh, a very important part of who Kamala Harris is, her
Mhm.
background, her worldview a bit, and for a former president to critique it like that or to make light of it in an offensive way, I think it deserves a question just to see where her head is at. You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
could she have been offended and said, I really, and gone off on some type of narrative about race in America? She could have, right? Which
Yeah.
would have been interesting
Yeah.
also. Yeah. So, but she didn't. She dismissed it. So now we know where her head is. She's not, because think about it. In former candidates, we had Obama, who did talk about race quite a bit. Um, he tried not to, but he was trapped in it. I mean, first black
Hmm.
man running for the top office in the land. Of course, he's going to talk about it. When he was president, he talked about it. You had Hillary Clinton, who talked about being a woman and breaking the glass ceiling, which I think turned people off to some degree.
Right.
Now you have a candidate who could talk about her being a woman, but also being considered a minority, black and Indian, and she's not even going to address it. She's like, no, my campaign is more about the issues, and I think that's important. I think that was
Yeah.
something important to point out. She didn't.
And
She
she
didn't go into it.
and it's also an opportunity to honor her heritage, and I think, well, and more than that, I'm not going to critique her as a candidate because that's not what we're talking about. But
Right.
but I think when you ask questions as a journalist, you're trying to find out things on behalf of the people that you represent. And are there enough people out there that have the same question that Trump have? Who are you? What are you? Um, Tell us more about your background. And are there Americans out there that have a question? I thought you were Indian because there's some people that are only white, only see black, only see white, and may not see the shades of diversity that make up Americans, because Americans have a rich heritage each inside of each one. There may be three or four ethnicities contributing to the beautiful people that they are, and it might be an opportunity to enlighten some people that she is one of those people that has a great Indian heritage, a great Jamaican heritage, but also experienced the black experience in America as well as African American. So I think when you're asking questions as a journalist, it's not, you may know the answer, or you may have the answer, but you may have an awareness that a lot of people want to know and want to hear from her on this subject. So I'm going to ask the question.
I agree. I think that the critique of this question almost speaks to maybe the privilege or the knowledge that some of us may have about biracialism or cultural awareness that a lot of Americans do not have. Let's be
Yeah,
frank.
they
We
don't.
think
Yeah,
we think that they do, but because we live in our own filter bubbles and our own circles and our own social circles, sociocultural
hmm
circles, we think that everyone is as aware as we are when it comes to variances in cultural nuance. But
hmm
that is very much not true. There's still people who are probably out there wondering how Black people or people with melanin can speak standardized English so adeptly. You know what I mean? Like, we have to
yeah.
be real about that. I know that sounds silly and almost offensive, but
Are you?
trust me, there are people who, once
Yeah,
when I go to certain states, you could tell that they're like, is this guy speaking in the way that he's speaking? What
yeah.
word did he just say? I don't know that word. How come I don't know that word? You know what I mean? And he's got melanin and I don't.
Uh,
Like, how is he
so,
speaking the
so
word? So we have to
what's
be people about that.
what is it, Colin, when they say you're so articulate?
Right, right. Like, I haven't heard that before, right? Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And it's gotten to a point where I remember I was listening to a radio station the other day, and a woman wanted to say that about Kamala Harris, and she was a sister. She identified as a Black woman, but she stopped herself
Yeah.
because knowing that has been a sentence that's marginalized who we are, and in an almost offensive way. She wanted to say that Harris was articulate, but she stopped and said, well, she's the way that she expresses herself is so
Yeah.
admirable. Like, she totally rephrased it. Like, now almost saying that a Black person is articulate is almost negative, which it shouldn't be, but it
Yeah.
has been used as a way of otherizing us and
You know,
marginalizing
but
us.
I do like that across the board, people realize that she's powerful, and she presents even in that interview where she's sitting a little bit shorter, and that's what we have to. I thought we need to start redefining what a president looks like, because the power that she possesses as an individual in her position comes forward, and the thoughtfulness comes forward. So I like the way that she presents herself, but I think that might be off-putting for some people. So I wonder, this article may still be relevant in terms of, how do you this is so there's a lot of things, like, so if you're a broadcast journalist, people will send you emails about what you're wearing, especially if you're a woman, or how you're wearing your hair. But now you have the potentially the most powerful person in the world, maybe a woman, in the next year. How do you talk to her? How do you address her? Do you ask her about who made her outfit? You ask the first lady, but do
But
you
we
ask
haven't heard
the
that so
president?
much. With Clinton, we heard
Yeah,
about the pantsuits almost all the time.
right.
And what's interesting about that is, because Clinton ran, because Warren ran, and because
hmm
Klobuchar ran, and many others, those questions aren't really asked anymore,
Yeah,
right? I haven't
yeah.
heard anyone talk
No,
about wardrobe.
no, I haven't heard any gender specific questions, other than I'm talking about maybe referring to the first man or the second man, whatever husband's distinction is, as the vice
Yeah,
president's husband. You know,
he's the second gentleman right now.
yeah, the second gentleman. That's cool. Yep.
Yeah. So, well, okay, so we'll leave it there, DK. I wanted to thank all of our viewers for watching us for this latest episode of the Capitol Press Club Legacy podcast. We shared some suggestions on how interviews could be composed a bit better for those of you who are broadcast journalists or podcasters looking to do your own thing. And we talked about some of the editorial control and some of the questions that could be asked of certain candidates there. We could have spoken a lot more about that. Maybe we'll get into that in upcoming weeks as we see more interviews with vice presidential candidate Harris and with presidential candidate Harris and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. All right, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching for episode 18 of the Capitol Press Club Legacy Podcast. Thanks to DK.